I have the great pleasure of speaking with Dr. Scott James today. He is a pediatrician out of Birmingham, Alabama, and he has also written several wonderful family-oriented resources, including one for Easter, for the week before and the week after Easter, called Mission Accomplished. And my family and I have been going through that resource this Easter season, and we've really enjoyed it. So thank you for writing that. It's been a blessing to us. So thank you also for being here today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So my first question is, Dr. James is a member of our advisory board, and so why is it that you support S4U? Why did you agree to be on the advisory board?
I think from what I had been hearing about S4U for several years, I was excited about the work that you guys were doing, the ministry focus that you had about being specifically where conversations can take place and actually being in the right moment at the right time to talk with someone, and in a loving and a compassionate way, and not an overbearing way, but in a way that welcomes conversation and is able to love on a person and start a conversation that can give someone some information, some different choices that they have perhaps not considered before when it comes to how to walk through their pregnancy. And so I'd heard, I knew a few people that were associated with you guys and had heard wonderful things of the ministry. And so when Andrew King at the time reached out, asked, he posed it as it would be helpful from his perspective to also have a physician perspective in the conversation. I'm not an obstetrician, but so I don't have that expertise or that speciality. But just from a general medical standpoint, I love what you do, and I love the space that you minister in. And so when I had the opportunity to be a part of that team and just in any way contribute to your success and ultimately the success of God's love for every human life, that was something that I felt compelled to be a part of.
Well, thank you for that, and we're very happy to have you on the advisory board. You're a big blessing to us. Yeah, so we are working to develop this training series for churches just about our approach, and just have churches throughout the country championing life, and just fighting for life and being a voice for life in their community. So I just wanted to get your perspective on, our approach in general, and then just as far as the usefulness of this training series for churches.
When I think about this topic, and as big and complex as this topic has become in terms of national conversation, I think about advocacy efforts and the different levels in which you can engage in advocacy and the different ways that we can speak gospel truth into this conversation. And I hope all of us are doing that in different ways and the different areas in which God has placed us. So I'm having those conversations, and I'm advocating on the medical campus, and others are doing it in churches and at the policy level and lawmakers and all of that. But all of it's important. But I think of the church's call to be a part of this conversation and to advocate for human dignity and to minister to people that are hurting and walking through these issues. And so I think of the church's ability to actually get into critical spaces and to be able to have these conversations. And I think if you asked almost any church in terms of their local ministry, how they're loving their community, how they're ministering to the people in their vicinity, all of them most likely would have a desire to do so and are probably doing so in different ways. But I think as far as this question goes, there's probably a lot of uncertainty about how I would even engage in that. So the easier thing would just be kind of to talk about it at a higher level and do some social media about it and hopefully mention it in the sermon as it comes up in the Word of God. But when it comes to actually face-to-face ministering with people that are walking through these decisions, and ministering to the healthcare workers that are a part of this process, that's a more difficult situation. And so when I think of S4U's training videos and the Speak for Life initiative that you guys are starting up, the idea of equipping the local church to be confident in the gospel, to be confident in the compassionate ministry that they can offer, and to not be scared of those moments, but to actually go into those with some equipping, with some training, reminded of the gospel. I think as you I think as a church goes through the curriculum, there's not going to be any weird hidden gospel truths that they haven't considered before. It's going to be the same gospel that we all know. But I think hopefully what you guys are going to be able to do is to equip them to connect those gospel truths that they cling dearly to, connect those to when you have the conversation on the sidewalk with the woman who's walking towards a fateful decision. And so I think of a local church ministering at that level and their advocacy going from high level stuff all the way down into the trenches to one-on-one personal conversation and care. That gets me excited. That makes me, I think about those ministry opportunities within the local church, and that's something that I'm excited to be a part of. And I'm looking forward to how S4U can minister to churches in that way.
Thank you for that. And I've got one more question for you, and I didn't prepare you for this, but so you mentioned something about having those conversations in the medical community, and they just brought the thought to my mind, what has that been like, especially lately, kind of with legislation and everything like that? What do those conversations really look like? I know there's probably a pretty broad spectrum of beliefs there, but how do you personally, advocate for life when you're speaking with somebody, a physician who's abortion minded?
Yeah, on the medical campus, on any medical campus, there's going to be a vast array of worldviews, and oftentimes I'm in an academic medical setting, and so it's we're drenched in secularism, even though we're in the middle of the Bible Belt. Where I work, where I function, where I practice, I'm walking through my career, my life with other men and women many of whom do not share my worldview and do not see the inherent dignity in human life as it pertains to the unborn. They see it in many other ways. And so there's language that I can grasp onto and use as a bridge that's all over. So we frequently talk about caring for vulnerable populations, proactive preventative care. Healthcare is just replete with really, really good initiatives that are seeking to get better health outcomes down into populations that are disproportionately affected, populations that are exceptionally vulnerable, populations that don't have access to care. And so all of those are things that are ready vocabulary that we have down at the hospital. And it's easy to connect the dots between caring for the vulnerable to caring for what I would consider to be the most vulnerable, the unborn, reborn baby, who is a distinct human life with, I can even go scientific with my friends. It's a distinct DNA pattern. This is not the mom's DNA. This is not the mom's body. It is a distinct entity with human DNA. You cannot deny that it is a human being. A human being that at that point is dependent upon another life. But again, in healthcare, we're very, very accustomed to the fact that some lives depend on external things for life. I mean, that's our daily life in the hospital, is having external support to sustain life. And the unborn child fits into that category. And so I can have that conversation with healthcare providers in a lot of different ways. There's bridges to that conversation that happen a lot. And honestly, what I find is a lot of times people just haven't thought through the fact that there are choices, that there are options within healthcare systems. And so for a lot of people, termination of pregnancy for just elective reasons has become such a commonplace thing to advise or consider or to request of the parents, in counseling, to offer that as an option. And I've had conversations with healthcare workers in which when I talk through about how that isn't necessarily the way to go, that isn't necessarily the recommendation that has to be made, oftentimes you can kind of see them sort of having not considered before that there are other choices. And so I tell the story often of an experience I had when I was in obstetrics training early in my career. So I didn't go into obstetrics, but I was with an obstetrics resident, and we were going to do a procedure. And on the way, I found out that it was going to be a DNC, an elective dilation and curettage. So we were going to do an elective abortion. And I, as soon as I found that out, I just kind of paused and said, "Hey, would it be cool if I just sat this one out? I'll jump in on another procedure." And it was no big deal. It was, "Sure, fine, no problem. You can get the next one." And then later in the day, this physician came and found me and just thanks for speaking up and opting out of that. It was a very simple thing, but it helped her realize, I don't have to do this. And she said to me that even in her training, she was very uncomfortable doing this, that she personally had different beliefs and did not agree and had, sincere doubts and discomfort over her role in this. And yet she felt that it was just so entrenched in the system. It was just a part of her training and a part of the process that she didn't really see that she had an option other than to do it. And my simple question actually made her rethink that and go have a conversation with her training program and work out a way in which she didn't have to violate her own conscience as she received the training that she needed to receive. It was a simple example of sometimes healthcare workers are so fixated on the path that's in front of them and the recommendations and the most logical thing to do next in a passionate way. And so bringing in humanity into that equation and caring for the human life that is there, and just bringing that up as an option is kind of eye-opening for some of them, because they're just not used to thinking that way, which is a bit of a paradox because I've spent many nights in neonatal intensive care unit up all night caring for 22-week-old babies. And not a person in that room would in any way look at that 22-week-old who is barely viable and is hanging on to life with multiple life support systems in place. Not a person in that room, no matter what their worldview, would in any way say that is not a living human being that is vulnerable and worthy of our protection in every effort we can give. Whether or not the birth mom wants to take the baby home and continue to care for the baby or give the baby up for adoption, there are ways to work that part of the equation out. But the simple fact of this premature baby is a precious human being that we need to do everything we can to take care of. And yet that same healthcare provider, if that baby were located 6 inches away,
right, would
say not worth protecting, not worth, and even then only dependent on whether or not the mother desires or doesn't desire to carry through. There's just logical fallacies that can sort of come in that in the healthcare system, since most people are so busy and inundated with the kind of the way things need to go. A lot of people don't stop. Many do. I don't want to sell people short, but a lot of people don't stop and just consider the moral implications and the logical inconsistencies in kind of how they're operating. So I look for ways, without being overbearing, I look for ways to just sort of simply ask questions, have bridge conversations, help just sort of unobtrusively open some eyes every now and then and get people to think. It's a balance because we work in a good work environment, and you've got to navigate that carefully, and you don't want to be disruptive and unnecessarily get in the way of gospel truth by inflicting pain. So I gotta be careful about how we do it, but it's a good opportunity. If I keep my eyes open, there are opportunities to have conversations.
Thank you so much for that. That was really encouraging, and I just really appreciate hearing that perspective. Thank you very much for sharing that. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate your support.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate y'all.